How many 20 years do we have in a lifetime? For Andy Dufresne, a well-respected banker from the quaint town of Maine, 20 years pales in comparison to the weight of 2 consecutive life sentences in prison. Despite his steadfast protest of innocence, he is convicted for a double murder of his wife and her pro-golfer lover. With no death penalty in the state of Maine at the time, Andy will be banking the rest of his life in Shawshank State Penitentiary. Alice Boy Redding, known as Red, supposedly Irish with red hair by the book. After 2 decades in Shawshank for murder, Red faces a parole interview. Despite confidence and good behavior, he denied parole. Known as the prison's top smuggler, his reputation precedes him. In 1947, sound of the alarm goes off in Shawshank, signaling new arrivals. Red and others bet on which newcomers will struggle the most. Red bets heavily on Andy, expecting him to falter in adapting to prison life. Bron Hadley, captain of the guards, Samuel Norton, the warden. They warmly welcome the newcomers with discipline and the Bible. They go through the mandatory hose down and the blinding delouse powder puff process. New fish enter their home, bare like newborns in the world. Lights out on the first night. A new inmate, nicknamed Fat Ass, breaks down in tears, leading Haywood to win the bet. Hadley brutally beats Fat Ass for making noise. Prisoners watch. Despite the chaos, Andy didn't make a sound. The Sisters is a group known for sexual assault. Their leader, Boggs, shows liking towards Andy. About a month later, Andy seeks out Red, the first person he spoke more than 2 words to. Aware of his reputation for obtaining items, he requests a rock hammer, citing his interest in rock collecting and sculpting. Despite Red's probing questions about Andy's intentions, Red's perception changes when he sees the small size of the hammer. During the initial 2 years of incarceration, Andy dedicates much of his time to working in the prison laundry, contending with the persistent harassment and assaults from Boggs and the Sisters. When a work detail for tarring the roof for one of the prison's building is announced, Red pulls some strings with a few packs of cigarettes. This provides everyone with a break from the usual routine and a chance to enjoy the fine weather. Andy overhears Hadley complaining about having paid taxes for an upcoming inheritance. Drawing from his expertise as a banker, Andy informs Hadley to how he can shelter his money from the IRS. He then offers to assist Hadley in filling out the paperwork in exchange for some cold beers for his fellow inmates. The spring of 1949, the crew sips on beer on the roof, feeling normal again for a brief moment. Andy wants to carve a chess piece board and teach Red how to play. While watching a movie, Andy makes another unusual request to Red. Exiting the theater, Andy encounters the Sisters. He endures a severe beating that lands him in the infirmary for a month. Boggs receives a week in solitary confinement as punishment. Upon his release, Boggs faces brutality from Hadley and the guards, leaving him permanently disabled and transferred to a prison hospital. Upon leaving the infirmary, Andy discovers a collection of rocks for sculpting and the giant Rita Hayworth poster in his cell, gifts from Red and his friends. Warden learns about Andy's assistance to Hadley. Upon finding Andy reading his copy of the Holy Bible, they engage in conversation about their favorite verses. While the guards thoroughly search the cell for any contraband, the warden almost forgets to return Andy's Bible. Andy is later assigned to work in the prison library with inmate Brooks. The placement becomes apparent when a prison guard seeks Andy's financial advice. Andy begins providing financial guidance to most prison guards, assisting them with their income tax returns. Andy seizes the opportunity to expand the prison library, initiating contact with the Maine State Senate for funds through weekly letters. His financial expertise without pay became highly sought after, with his clientele including the warden. Not long after, Brooks has a sudden breakdown and threatens Haywood with violence, hoping to sabotage his own parole. Red recognizes that Brooks has become institutionalized after spending 50 years at Shawshank. Perhaps over time, hope diminishes beyond the prison walls. Brooks being granted parole and given a job at the supermarket. He has become so accustomed to the life behind bars. The thought of adaptation outside the prison walls became fearful. He eventually takes his own life, all alone in the halfway house, leaving behind the message, Brooks was here. After hearing this, Andy dedicates himself to the improvement and expansion of the library. Andy discovers an Italian copy of the Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro among the items. He locks the guards assigned to the office in the bathroom and plays the record over the prison PA system. The enhanced music captivates the entire prison, offering a fleeting moment of freedom to all. The warden is furious at Andy's act of rebellion. Andy is sent to solitary confinement for 2 weeks. Upon his release, Andy shares with his friends that the time spent alone was surprisingly bearable. Andy emphasizes the power of hope in prison. Red strongly disagrees, arguing that hope is dangerous in a place like Shawshank. Andy subtly suggests that this is what Brooks did, which leads Red to leave. Not long after, Red undergoes another parole hearing, and he has been incarcerated for 30 years. 10 more years to go. This time, the delivery lacks any hint of enthusiasm. His parole is once again denied. For Red's 3 decades behind bars, Andy presents him with a harmonica. Red offers Andy a larger poster featuring Marilyn Monroe, symbolizing the 10 years Andy has spent in prison. After a total of 10 years, they granted him an annual budget of $500 to expand the library. In honor of Brooks, the library is named after him. Warden exploits Andy's expertise by developing a scheme to use prison inmates as inexpensive labor for public projects. He allows external contractors to win projects if their bribes are substantial enough. Andy confides in Red. He facilitates the process of laundering money by establishing multiple bank accounts under the fictitious identity of Randall Steffens, who was merely a figment of paperwork. In 1965, a young inmate named Tommy arrived at Shawshank, serving time for breaking and entering. Tommy is well-liked and quickly forms a friendship with the crew. Andy suggests that he explore other avenues besides theft. Tommy, who is becoming a father, seeks Andy's assistance in pursuing his high school equivalency diploma. He becomes frustrated during the exam, crumbling up his paper in frustration. Andy retrieves it and submits it on Tommy's behalf. Curious about Andy's background, Tommy seeks information from Red. Upon hearing about Andy's imprisonment, Tommy is shaken. He then reveals his own past former cellmate who boasts about committing a gruesome murder. The cellmate's confession implicated an innocent man, a banker who was wrongfully convicted for the crimes. Afterwards, Andy approaches the warden, expecting support in seeking a new trial with Tommy's testimony. Warden dismisses Tommy's testimony as lies. Andy, resolute in his innocence, Warden sent him to solitary confinement for a month. Tommy receives a letter from the Board of Education, confirming his success in the exam and awarding him a high school diploma. Andy receives news of Tommy's achievement through a passing guard. One night, Tommy is escorted outside for a private meeting with the warden. Warden questions Tommy whether he would testify on Andy's behalf. Tommy eagerly agrees. The warden silently orders Hadley to execute Tommy. Later, Warden visits Andy and fabricates a story about Tommy's attempted escape and subsequent death. Andy refuses to cooperate any longer. The warden threatens Andy with shutting the library down. Andy is sentenced to another month in solitary to reconsider. After Andy emerges from solitary, he and Red engage in a conversation. He shares his aspiration for life beyond prison, envisioning a peaceful existence in Zihuatanejo. Before departing, Andy tells Red of a specific location near Buxton, Maine, a hayfield marked by a large oak tree at the end of a stone wall. He implores Red to promise to seek out something hidden if he ever earns parole. Concerns escalate when he learns of Andy's request for a length of rope from Haywood. Meanwhile, Andy finishes up accounting for the warden. He is then assigned to polish Warden's shoes to shine like glass. As darkness falls, Red describes it as the longest night he's ever experienced. The following morning, Andy fails to respond to the morning call. Meanwhile, the warden discovers Andy's shoes in his shoebox. Rushing to Andy's empty cell, Warden demands answers. Hadley brings in Red for questioning. Warden hurls Andy's sculpted rocks around the cell. In a moment of frustration, he throws a rock at Andy's poster, unveiling a hidden tunnel just wide enough for a person to crawl through. Years ago, shortly after obtaining his rock hammer, Andy discovered the wall's vulnerability while attempting to carve his name. Andy devised a plan for potential escape. He concealed the hole behind the giant Rita Hayworth poster and carved it over 19 years using his rock hammer. Andy emptied the extracted dirt from his pockets during his morning walks. During the stormy night, Andy concealed Warden's clothes beneath his own attire, slipping under the radar as he returned to his cell. He assembled his essentials and Warden's garments into a plastic bag, securing it to himself with the rope he had acquired. Escaping through the hole in his cell, Andy navigated through the tunnel to a concealed area between the prison walls. At the sewer main line, Andy timed the sound of the thunder as he utilized a rock to rupture the pipe. A nauseous journey through 500 yards of sewage. Andy finally emerged in a brook beyond the prison confines. In the aftermath, the search team only found a bar of soap and a cute small rock hammer. Under the guise of Randall Steffens, Andy confidently enters the Maine National Bank in Portland, armed with all necessary documentation. With a cashier's check in hand, he closes the account and arranges for a package to be mailed out before leaving. Andy's day trip visits to nearly a dozen local banks, concluding with a total around $370,000. Meanwhile, the package containing all Warden's incriminating accounting books is dispatched directly to the Portland Daily Bugle newspaper. Shortly after, the Maine State Police, accompanied by reporters, descend upon Shawshank Prison. Hadley is apprehended for the alleged murder of Tommy. Local district attorney and officers armed with a warrant for the warden's arrest. Warden opens his safe, expecting to find his financial ledgers. Instead, he discovers the Bible. Warden is stunned to find its pages hollowed out in the shape of Andy's rock hammer. In a moment of despair, the warden draws a small revolver. Not long after, Red receives a postcard bearing no message, interpreting it as a signal of Andy's successful escape to Mexico. Red and his companies reminisce about Andy. He misses his friend very much. In 1967, during Red's parole hearing, He expresses remorse to the board. After spending decades in confinement, he has become institutionalized. This year, his plea is accepted, and Red is released on parole. Adjusting to life beyond the prison walls, Red retraces the footsteps of his former friend, Brooks. Red embarks on a journey to Buxton, locating the stone wall described by Andy. Beneath the black stone lays a small box filled with a substantial sum of money, and inviting Red to seek him out in Zahuatanillo. Overwhelmed by the surge of hope within Red, before departing the halfway house, Red carves on the wooden beam next to Brooks was here. He breaks parole, confident that no one will go on a manhunt for an old crook like him. He crosses into Mexico, where he finally reunites with Andy on a tranquil beach along the Pacific coast. Hope can be a transformative force that enables individuals to persevere and find redemption, regardless of the challenges one may face.